Well, my friends, I'm excited to be having my first upfront dialogue here. My conversation partner today is Alyssa Walker Keller. Now, I did a mismatch of a previous write-up that I have from you and from the website. So if you're like, hey, this sounds very familiar, I just crammed them together. She grew up in East County, not too far from here, and has been working with schools and immigrant communities in this area for 20 years. Alyssa is the Asylum Seeker Support Project Coordinator with the immigrant justice organization Emerge. She's also an organizer in East Multnomah County for the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition. I understand both of those are a mouthful. We'll get into them. We'll clarify what is what. She is passionate about learning, listening to people's stories over coffee, the outdoors, and creating space and belonging for all in the beautiful state of Oregon. Alyssa, thank you for being here. We've been going through a season of harvesting as a congregation, and this is our last Sunday of it. Now, to clarify what I mean for anybody who this may be the first time of, my first Sunday, when I had the privilege of being here in July, we put together this harvest board. I asked, what are the things that you feel God desires for this church? What are the things that you feel God is leading us in? And this is what you put together. And in the weeks since I started in September, every single week we've dealt with a specific theme. And every single one of those, we've done some deeper harvesting, some deeper brainstorming or heart searching, or, just gauging. What can we do together? What is representative of us in our relationship with each other, with the broader community, with God? And so this right here, this specific conversation, this is a representation of some of the work we've done harvesting. We're not doing these every single week. Where we reached a consensus around was, a general consensus was, we'll do these less often. And I picked once a month. And you'll have to let me know in a few months if that pace works for you. Now, this is our final week of it, and instead of doing some harvesting amongst the entire church for this, given the specific theme that came up, it just seemed most appropriate to speak to somebody who's involved in community organizing that I've worked with and that I trust. Alyssa, you're a part of two different organizations, and as you walk on up here, I would like you to think about, hey, how can I sum those up in a couple of paragraphs? So come up and join me up at the table, please. Also, here is a cup of water if you get thirsty.
Can everyone hear me okay? New technology. You said that you were going to show how all of these organizations kind of like come together and work together. I was thinking to myself, boy, I can't wait for Giuseppe to explain this to me too.
Yeah, no.
So still working on that. I'm really happy to be with all of you. And as we were driving over, I actually realized I have some gratitude to share with this congregation specifically, because the day that I decided to accept the land and housing job last year and think about becoming a community organizer, which I knew nothing about, I listened to an interview on Think Out Loud with Dave Miller, and he was talking to Jan, who helped create the tiny home village on your property. And that was the moment that I was like, oh, this is what I want to be doing and be a part of. So thank you all for the gift of the role that I'm in now.
That's great.
Yeah, I just realized it as I got here.
You know, we have these moments. I mentioned a few weeks ago, we don't always know the impact we're having on other people. It's just hard to know. But it's always nice to get some of that feedback, right? So what exactly is Levin Land and Housing Coalition?
Well, I get to cheat a little bit today because if any of you read The Oregonian, there's a front page story about it. Um, and the work that we're doing. But Levin Land and Housing Coalition is a part of Levin, which is a community of, it's a congregation that decided that as they were getting smaller and smaller, that they didn't want to be the only entity in that building. And so they decided to become a space where there were so many partners coming into and using the space that if the church itself died, the space was still full of life. And so one of the outreaches that this community created or built space for was the Land and Housing Coalition. And so Levin is working with, I think we have contact with probably 50 congregations around the state, but primarily at this point, we're pretty closely in contact with about 20 who are in the metro area and then a few further out. And working with congregations who are in discernment about how to create space and belonging on their land. So last year, I started working with Levin as the East County organizer. And there are about 5 congregations out here who were a part of that work. Covenant Presbyterian, Centennial Christian, and Troutdale Faith, the Lentz Tongan Church, Gethsemane Lutheran, and, oh, I'm forgetting someone. Don't tell them. But it was a gathering of congregations that were interested in, like, how do we use our land and steward it in a way that builds belonging in the community? And so for some of those congregations, it was working on the name change that Centennial did. And for some congregations like Covenant, it's discerning how do we become a space where people can come and use this land and feel a sense of community developed there. And for Gethsemane, it's how do we use our sea of parking for the community. And for Troutdale Faith, it was discerning, can we build on this land and build affordable housing specifically? So.
Yeah.
That is the work of Levin Land and Housing, is to support congregations in that process and provide the congregations themselves the opportunity to form a team and do organizing practices together, learn about organizing, learn about listening, learn about harvesting, learn about coming together as a community and listening to what the community is naming and then acting towards that. It's a long answer.
I'm appreciative, though.
Okay.
So some of you are wondering, why does he have his phone out? One of the things that I've received from all of you as we've harvested and just had a conversation together is these are nice, but could they not last an hour? Mm-hmm. So I'm putting a timer on.
That's good.
Okay? And when we're done, we're going to get coffee and cookies, not when we're done with the conversation, when we're done with our service time together. Don't go out there and get coffee prematurely. So what about Emerge?
So Emerge is the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, and it's an organization that works to support immigrant community and building belonging here in Oregon for more recently arrived folks. They were part of the sanctuary law that was put in place. They've been part of getting ICE enforcement out of courthouses and keeping people who might be feeling really vulnerable showing up to a courthouse safe. So at this point, we have 2 active programs. One is the court accompaniment program, where volunteers go with a person who has to do an immigration court check-in, and not necessarily as lawyers, but just as a friend, a support person who can help navigate the signs in English and the questions in English, and provide the assurance that if something happens, that your family will know what happened to you. And then my role over the last year has been working with people who are recently arrived and seeking asylum, and working towards creating a system of support for people, because it's very different to arrive seeking asylum from arriving as a refugee. You're still fleeing really dangerous situations and seeking protection here, but you don't have the support of case management or reception funds when you arrive here, or housing stability. So that's been the past year of my work in that.
Thank you. Before we move on, how's the sound? How's the microphones and the sound? Is it doing okay? All right, great. So, of all the things you could be doing in the world, why have you chosen to work with these two organizations?
That's a great question. And I have kind of steadfastly, and Pat will be a testament to this, refused to choose one because I see the two things intersecting. I think if you have people who are arriving seeking housing and safety, and you have congregations who are willing to create housing and safety on their land, there needs to be a merging of those two voices so that the congregations hear the stories of the people who are arriving and build relationship and create safety. And people who are seeking community and naming that it's really hard to be here so far away from their home and families get integrated into spaces like this that have been intended as sanctuaries.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So we have some really important partnerships with organizations that we believe in. Do you have any wisdom to share regarding what you see as necessary for communities like ours, specifically our church community, to maintain healthy relationships with these partners?
That's a really good question. From what I have witnessed from the outside, which admittedly is through the news, I think you all did a really great start to that work by listening to what you've noticed in the community. I think the first part of good organizing is being observant and seeing the needs that are arising. It's one thing to pop up a soup kitchen and address a specific need. It's a lot bigger and braver to say, hey, this is our land and we're going to share it with other people who are walking from different walks of life and listen to their stories. And I feel really encouraged that you're doing that work. Because I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize the stories of other people and don't sit with open hands and hearts and ears to listen. So I feel really encouraged that you're already starting that, and I would just encourage you to continue listening. This harvest season, I think, is a really important part of the process to pause and evaluate and think about what we've learned, and then you can act based on what you've learned and discern together.
Thank you. So you and I have talked in the past, and we know many examples of this, that people who are empathetic and big-hearted and are deeply concerned about the things happening in our area, will show up, and we immediately, we're so excited to act. We may even come, especially those of us with, considerable privilege, we may even come highly expectant of results, right? We show up and we're like, this problem, I'm putting in some good old-fashioned elbow grease, and we're gonna fix it. We're gonna convince city council to do X, Y, or Z. We're gonna get this measure passed, and then months and months go by, and perhaps we've been successful, perhaps we haven't, but the sheer weight of more work to be done becomes more pressing and overwhelming. And we may even find ourselves considering departing from the work. Burnout's real when it comes to community organizing. It's real when it comes to any kind of advocacy or activism work or partnership, really, right? So what do you see as necessary for longevity from community members who are involved in work like yours?
Building relationships with people that you trust. Pat was chuckling because he's like, who are you texting on Sunday morning? And I have a group of people who I've built a relationship with, who I trust their judgment to the ends of the earth. and we were just having a conversation about something. And Sunday morning was the time that it happened. And I think it's really, really the symptom of burnout that I know in myself is when I feel like it's all on me, that I have to hold this on my own. And I don't believe that that was intended by God. I think God sent the disciples out in pairs. God thought a lot about how to bring people collectively together. And even in the story of the loaves and fishes, when everyone came together and sat on the ground, Jesus didn't walk around like fish, bread, fish, bread. He had the disciples group people, organize them, and then he sent the disciples out to go and share the wealth, and he empowered them to do that work. And I think that there's something really powerful when community comes together. I can't move a city council person on my own. I don't have that kind of power. But if I showed up with every person in this room and we all wore the same color shirt and we wrote testimonies and told stories, that has a different kind of weight. It's people power. In the Land and Housing Coalition, we talk a lot about land power, people power, and money power. And I think that those things, you can be strategic about how you flex those things. And I think that doing it in community is really the only way to spend time with congregations who are doing the work similar to you, to build relationship. I was at St. Andrew's in North Portland this week talking with Reverend Jennifer, and they're in the process of starting to do the exact same thing you all did a year ago with We Shine. And it just, to me, the immediate thought I had was like, oh, I need these congregations to talk to each other because you all have experience and wisdom, and they are brand new, just starting to get to the place where they're, dealing with neighbors who are feeling anxious, and also there's something really encouraging about being just a little further along in the process and seeing the new folks come in and being able to share with them. It strengthens your resolve to know that you're not the only congregation holding this. So to my mind, I just think the key to longevity is staying together and working with community.
I think that's interesting because we have this picture of folks who have moved the needle when it comes to so many of the great things that we take for granted in our society. There's lots of work to be done, right? But we can point to things that have happened in the past and been like, oh, Martin Luther King Jr. And we forget that Martin Luther King Jr. was a part of a much broader community. We think of Mother Teresa. We think of so many admirable folks. We often are thinking about these charismatic figures who just have this magnetism to them and this charm. I was reading some of King's sermons, and a friend of mine was like, you know what? I almost quit preaching after I read those. I get it. He's great. Those are good. But without a community, those things fall apart. Yeah. And that's stuff that every single one of those people that just came to my mind harped on. Don't just wait for me to do it. We need to do it together.
Yeah, Mother Teresa created an order. If the civil rights movement had really only ridden on Martin Luther King's shoulders, it would have died, right?
Right.
And Jesus, if Jesus died and hadn't organized his community, would we be hearing the stories now, right? It's the impact of community work that lasts.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I have felt the temptation in the past. I think especially when I was, early in my deconstruction, I'm beginning to see and let more of the pain of the world kind of seep into me a bit, that I had to have it all together. I had to have it all figured out, which I think was an example of some of my, the privilege that I experienced in this previous chapter of my life. But also, I think there's a part of it that comes with this aspect of Christianity, progressive or conservative or in between, that says, hey, you got to be a martyr. If you're not laying it all down, you're doing it wrong. And we often mistake, I think, our roles for Jesus. There are times in our life where we have to perhaps give give sacrificially for people we care about. But those times are often few and far between. It's the work of like living together as community and leaning on each other that I think gets us through. And
Couldn't
luckily,
agree
we've
more.
got this pandemic we could just like point to and be like, hey, that was rough, right? What was the worst part about it? Oh, the isolation, right. But how did we get through it? Well, I imagine your story is a lot like mine in community with other folks, even if the community was over the phone or through email or, social media. Too much of it was social media for me.
So much Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost my place in my questions here because I got excited. So we are interested in building more relationships with community partners, and there's so many important issues affecting us and our neighbors. So how would you advise us go about approaching new partnerships?
It's a really good question. I do think there's wisdom in keeping your ears close to the ground to, there's, 30 people, 40 people in this room. If each of you are having a couple conversations a month with people from different walks of life and then bringing that back and thinking together, I think that's a really good way to keep your eyes on the goal. And I guess, can you say the last part of the question again?
Yeah, how would you advise us to go about considering new partnerships?
I think it's listening for the spark. Like, is this person or group of people like lit up about the same things that we are collectively lit up about? You already have like a huge, enormous start, and I think when it comes to affordable housing and reckoning with the challenges of being unhoused in Portland right now, you're already doing that work. And it's pretty locational, right? Like it's local to where you are right now. And there happen to be like organizations that work with people in this community. There's Cultivate, there's Path Home, there's like family shelters in the area too. And I just wonder what it could look like to deepen the listening with some of those partners and then keep building together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have worked with community partners who, maybe I don't know about. I was having a conversation with Pat, like not a very long conversation, but I learned that he was here once for an Emerge thing.
I was here for the Emerge
You were
thing.
here for the Emerge thing. You were here for something else. Girl Scouts. I mean, the same kind of work, really. And that was a reminder to me that there must be a past of working with Emerge to some capacity if you've been here for an Emerge thing. And I wonder how many other relationships like that kind of exist as well. Like how many other previous partners? I would love to know that. I'd love to learn some of that history of partnership here. And there's also some stories that I'm getting bits and pieces of from people's different perspectives that I've just really enjoyed. I learned from Reverend Don about the community garden, and he was so excited about it. And I said, "Oh, that's a great idea. How did you think of it?" And he said, "I didn't. I hate gardening." Somebody, other people in the church, they saw that for high quality food, nutritious food in our area, and they took it upon themselves to begin that process. Now, I think a difficult thing is there's no end to the need, but I really appreciate that you're talking about like, yeah, but look where the intersectionality is already and build on those things. Now we have some time for some questions, and don't worry, this is programmed out time. It's not additional time. So we're not going into like extra innings or anything. Church, I'm wondering what questions that you may have for Alyssa.
I was wondering too, actually. So
Rita. Thank you, Rita.
You want to repeat that back?
Sure. So I think Rita was raising a suggestion that it would be really great if we could get organizations and churches together to work with each other for continuing this work of building spaces and making spaces available for people who are unsheltered to have shelter of various kinds and have various needs met. And how would you address that?
I didn't plant Rita in the audience, but you really touched on an important thing that I think is really beautiful, which is like many layers of how do you address this problem? Do you talk to Tina Kotek? Do you find the funds? Do you talk to other churches? Do we just find volunteers to help build the shelters? I think you all have a core team of folks who would be interested in working with land and housing. I mean, there's, that I know of, multiple congregations like locally right here and across the area who are doing this work. And kind of what you named, that, you know, some people might want to talk to the governor. Some people might want to just volunteer on a Saturday and help build the shelter. Some people might want to do organizing with other churches. And one of the things that I'm very excited about this year, my role shifted a little bit within land and housing, so I'm not just as East County focused. I'm working with a couple different congregations, but I'm also helping organize 2 community core teams. So one of them is with asylum seekers in the area. It's like the bridging space of my 2 work areas. And one is organizing a team of housing service providers. So working with Cultivate, Path Home, and Love One, and potentially some other providers to do the list. You hear me? Okay, good. So I think that it will be a really beautiful opportunity for us to make sure that whatever our congregations are hearing from these teams is what's getting baked into the responses that we are building. Are we building tiny homes for veterans? And maybe over here, we're hearing from the asylum seeker community that they'd really love to have like a trailer park or apartment complex or somewhere where there's like community space where they can, you know, learn classes and skills and workforce development and, you know, get certified for all the things that they learned back at home, but also live near each other. Or maybe there's a group like Barbie's Village, which is a partnership with the Presbytery, where the Presbytery is giving land back to a community of indigenous folks to have a tiny home village on their property to do like for family space and also community events. So I guess to answer your question, Rita, I would get in contact with organizations like Lovin, and I drank the Kool-Aid. I believe in it deeply that we're stronger together.
We got to come back to the Barbie's Village thing in a moment.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, I thought I saw some. You're itching your face, and you're like, no, 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 no. Okay.
We already are. It may not be as visible. And we're not like the first landing spot for a lot of folks. A lot of folks are bused from the border to Chicago, DC, New York. And oftentimes people arrive here as a secondary or tertiary location. But over the past year, we've seen an influx in folks, and there's no system to receive them, like I mentioned. And so what happens is people arrive, and they may not have any contact here whatsoever. They may not have any relationships here, or they're trying to reunify with a family member who is in a shelter. And the very abbreviated version of what has happened this past year is that a shelter was stood up for this community, and the legislature gave money towards the people who were put into that shelter to be rehoused and to shut the shelter, which is a really, really unwise situation when you have many more similarly situated people arriving. So what's been happening is I and my little group of colleagues who I was mentioning that I got my Sunday morning text from are getting phone calls from people at 10:30 p.m. saying, I went to the Safe Rest Village. I've been in Oregon for 3 hours. It's 10:30 p.m. and my twins and I don't know where to go. And what ends up happening is like toddlers are sleeping outside on the concrete because we don't have a system yet. And so that's something that I feel really passionate about. Like, how do we create a space so that no one arrives here and sleeps outside because they don't know who to call? And so that's kind of the intersection of these works. We're working with all these faith communities who have land and want to create space and belonging for people. And here's a community that needs that space and belonging because they've been forced from the place that was home.
Now, Alyssa, you're going to be sticking around for a little bit after the service. We are going to have coffee and snacks. So in between now and then, you can think about any questions you may have for her about either Emerge or Leaven. But I didn't want to end this conversation without letting you talk about Barbie's Village and what's happening tomorrow on Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah, so as a coalition and actually as a group of other organizing communities that are using the same organizing principles, we're going to go to the site of the future Barbie's Village, which will be a tiny home site in Northeast. I can't remember the name of the congregation, but Giuseppe has the email, and maybe if you don't mind sending it out to everyone. The church closed a few years ago, and the presbytery is in the process of giving the land back. And they're making a really big vote really soon on how that land will be stewarded and, finalizing the details. And of course, you can imagine that's a big deal for a big denomination to just give the land back to the people who were first here. Barbie's Village team is hosting an event. So it's, I believe, from 4 to 8. There will be the opportunity to learn more about organizing and see some of the organizing groups for the first hour. And then there will be like traditional salmon dinner that everyone is welcome to, and to like dream together at the site. And then we're all going to be writing cards to the presbytery telling them how wonderful we think it is that they are doing this really important work, kind of as a like, we are with you, we believe in this. And I would love to see any and all of you there.
All right, so I didn't want to forget to send that email out. It's tomorrow from 4 until 8, and it's not telling me the name of the church here.
Okay.
But the address is 935 Northeast 33rd. So
Not terribly far from here.
yeah, 935 North 33rd. Is that what I said?
Northeast 33rd.
Northeast 33rd. Okay. Alyssa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
I've enjoyed this greatly. I hope you have as well.